After being reborn, I changed my college preference. Ethan often stayed on campus during weekends, so I locked myself in my room, studying tirelessly. When he brought Emily back home, I moved out. When he decided to attend University B with Emily, I applied to University A instead. In my previous life, before the college entrance exams, Ethan, knowing full well that I hadn't stolen anything, still accused me of being a thief. He did it just to ensure that he and Emily could be together cleanly and honestly. Fine, let them be together. But clean and honest? Did they even deserve such words? Nobody knew I had been reborn, staring at my mock exam scores. I was on the verge of breaking down. In my past life, just before the college entrance exams, I was falsely accused of stealing Emily's watch. The accusation shattered my mental state, leading to my worst performance ever during the exams and a result far below my usual capability. The first thing I did after being reborn was to change my college preference to university. My teacher was shocked and asked, "Didn't you always say you wanted to go to the same university as Ethan? Does he know about this?" Hearing Ethan's name, an image of his tall and protective figure flashed through my mind. Everyone always said I was unworthy of him. His family was wealthy. He was good-looking. And he was a model student in the eyes of the teachers. Meanwhile, I was just the daughter of his father's old comrade in arms, someone his family had supported out of loyalty. I smiled faintly and replied, "I don't think that way anymore. I feel University A suits me better now." In my previous life, my mock exam scores consistently surpassed University A's cutoff. But to follow Ethan, I foolishly changed my preference to University B. My sudden decision surprised my teacher, who patted my shoulder approvingly. In that past life, Ethan and Emily orchestrated the accusation against me, claiming I had stolen Emily's watch. Emily had pulled me aside in front of everyone, her face streaked with tears, demanding justice. "Claire, I know my family isn't wealthy and you look down on me, but this watch was a gift from Ethan. I've been so careful with it. Please, I'm begging you. Just return it to me," she said, her voice trembling. Her sobbing grew louder as she collapsed into Ethan's arms. Ethan glared at me and said, "Claire, when you were bullying Emily, did you ever think about your own background? Being poor isn't wrong, but letting poverty breed evil intentions is. Hand over the watch now, and we'll forget this ever happened." The crowd looked at me with disdain, mocking and enjoying the drama. I smiled bitterly. The boy who had once promised to protect me for a lifetime. How had he become like this? My chest felt as if a boulder were crushing it. My heart ached deeply. I hadn't stolen the watch, so how could I return it? They had no concrete evidence against me, so they couldn't do much at that moment. However, I never expected Ethan, who had always been kind to me, to lock me in a room under the pretext of teaching me a lesson while his parents were away. Emily had complained about our public argument, saying it embarrassed her. Ethan told me I had always been able to endure, so a little suffering wouldn't matter. Emily, being delicate, couldn't handle public gossip, he said. That night, the door remained locked. My nerves finally snapped. The next day was the college entrance exam. I pounded on the door and windows, screaming for help, but the only response was my own voice echoing in the vast, empty villa, in despair. I grabbed a glass from the desk and smashed it against the window without hesitation. The shards cut into my flesh, and the pain overwhelmed me by the faint light of dawn. I sat there, shivering and cold. I endured the pain and somehow managed to complete the 3-day exam. But my mental state was in ruins. I performed worse than ever and ended up at a mediocre university. In the end, I died in a car accident orchestrated by Emily. I hated those two with every fiber of my being. But now I had been given another chance. I was reborn 3 months before the college entrance exams. This time, I could change everything. Back at Ethan's house, I began packing my things. This villa was a wedding gift from Ethan's parents to him for when he got married. Olivia had always treated me well, but there was no longer any possibility for me and Ethan. The warmth I felt toward Olivia had to be buried deep in my heart as I packed my belongings. I began drafting a new study plan. My gaze fell on the photograph of my dream university hanging on the wall. Hope filled my heart. As long as I stayed steady and performed well on the exams, I'd soon leave this place behind for good. That evening, I cooked dinner as usual. Ethan came back as expected, with Emily trailing behind him.
Claire.
Emily chirped sweetly. Ethan brought me over again for dinner. You don't mind, do you? Emily was petite, her oval-shaped face framed by fair skin. She looked especially pure and delicate in her white school uniform. She made herself at home, squealing with delight at the sight of the dishes I had prepared. Without hesitation, she called out for Mrs. Smith, the housekeeper, to serve the food. She got a bowl of porridge. Ethan got one and Mrs. Smith got one, but none for me. By the time I returned from the bathroom, the three of them were already seated at the table. Chatting and laughing like a family, Emily took one bite and immediately spit it out. I'm allergic to peanuts, she exclaimed, tears welling in her eyes. I leaned against the door frame, watching Ethan pour her a bowl of soup. He didn't realize until too late that it also had a peanut base. Emily left the house crying, muttering to Ethan as she went. Claire probably doesn't like me. I won't come back anymore. Ethan escorted her to the door and returned, frowning. I ignored him and sat down to eat.
You did that on purpose, he said.
His voice tinged with confusion. Then, as if trying to justify himself, he added, Emily's family is struggling. I bring her here to have a good meal, just like my family did for you all those years.
I didn't reply.
Ethan sighed and shook his head, as if conceding defeat. If you don't like her, I'll take her to a restaurant next time. A week later, Ethan stayed on campus to tutor Emily. Meanwhile, I carried a thick stack of practice exams to the library. In the past, Ethan would stay home and study with me. I'd patiently guide him through each problem, but now he was focused on helping his new flame prepare for their shared future at University B. As I packed my books, I came across certificates of achievement Ethan and I had earned over the years. I couldn't help but wonder. Would he be able to maintain his grades while using study sessions as an excuse for their dates? I decided to take my own certificates, my hard-earned accomplishments, and pack them into my bag. These honors were mine alone, earned through my effort, not thanks to Ethan or his family. I bundled them up and left the villa for the old apartment building where I had grown up. It was far out in the suburbs, but it carried the memories of my childhood. I carefully cleaned my father's military plaque, the one he had received posthumously for his bravery. Dad, I whispered, I promise I'll do whatever it takes to achieve my goals. With just over 2 months left until the exams, I could already see freedom on the horizon. After that, I would leave Ethan's family behind forever. Ethan came home late that night. The dinner I had prepared sat untouched. I ate at school, he explained casually, but the faint scent of gardenias on him told me otherwise. He had eaten with Emily. He probably knew it wouldn't go over well to bring her back. So they ate out before he returned. I silently motioned for Mrs. Smith to clear the dishes and went to my room. The only belongings left in the room were some seasonal clothes and study materials. I packed the clothes into my suitcase, leaving the rest for later. Once Ethan went out on one of his dates next week, I packed the rest of my things, since I was determined to build a better future. I devoted all my time to studying, while others wasted their days flirting and chatting. I poured every ounce of energy into my review sessions. I was deep into my work when a knock came at the door. I knew it was Ethan. My father had saved his father's life on the battlefield, sacrificing his own in the process. Because of this, Ethan always treated me with a level of respect. He would never enter my room without my permission. What is it? I asked. Not wanting him to see that I was packing, he hesitated before saying, the engagement banquet is being prepared. How about the 3rd day after the exams? In my previous life, our engagement had been arranged according to the wishes of our parents, set to take place right after the college entrance exams. I glanced at my suitcase and replied indifferently, there's no rush. Let's talk once Olivia gets back. Ethan stood silently outside my door for a long moment before finally walking away. I finally heard Ethan's footsteps fade away, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Resting my head on the desk, I felt a sense of relief. Given Ethan's age, Olivia usually trusted his judgment more. Since I had lost both my parents as a child, Olivia took me in because of the marriage pact our parents had made. To outsiders, I was already considered a part of Ethan's family, and the engagement was just a formality. Besides, Ethan was good-looking, excelled in his studies, and treated me well. It was no secret that my heart had always been his. Everyone could see it. I owed the Johnson family for raising me all these years, but I had paid them back in full, teaching Ethan tirelessly, even in my previous life, when he falsely accused me and locked me in a room, ruining my future. That was enough repayment. In this life, I owed them nothing. I was determined to walk my own path that weekend. To my surprise, Ethan didn't stay on campus. Even brought breakfast. My favorite ate treasure porridge and fried dough sticks. It was something he hadn't done in ages. I scrolled through vocabulary words on my phone as I silently sat down at the table. The only sounds were the occasional clinks of utensils against bowls. "I'll stay home with you to study today," Ethan suddenly said, breaking the silence. I looked at him in surprise and instinctively shook my head. "Don't you want me to keep you company?" he asked, frowning slightly. "You'll just be cooped up in your room all weekend." I was about to find an excuse to decline when the doorbell rang. Emily's voice came through the intercom. "Ethan," she called cheerfully. She stood at the door, holding 2 breakfasts in her hands. As soon as the door opened, she tilted her head up and smiled at Ethan, effectively blocking my view of him. "Why are you here?" "I told you to wait for me," Ethan said, moving slightly to shield her from my gaze. Emily peeked out cautiously from behind his chest. "Sorry, Claire," she said softly. "I was worried he might skip breakfast, so I came to find him." I stared at her face, so innocent and pure, just like in my previous life. No matter what she said, it could always stir Ethan's protective instincts. When Ethan heard that she had been willing to go hungry just to wait for him, he naturally followed her out in a hurry, abandoning his earlier promise to stay. So much for keeping me company. He had planned to meet her all along. I scoffed to myself. At least I didn't have to worry about making up an excuse to pack my things and leave. I pulled out my phone and checked my moving checklist. Wasting no time, I dragged my previously packed clothes and belongings out of the house and called a moving service to take them to my new apartment. Once everything arrived, I organized my things and smiled at the photos of the modest place. "Dad," I whispered, "your daughter can live just fine on her own, without relying on anyone." I spent the entire day at home studying and only returned to Ethan's house in the evening. The intense pace of exam preparation made the days fly by. Late at night, under the glow of streetlights, it was always my shadow bent over books, chasing knowledge. On Friday evening, Olivia and her husband, Mr. Johnson, returned from a business trip. They sat quietly on the living room sofa for a long time before letting out a deep sigh. "Claire," Olivia began earnestly, "he's just close with another classmate, but you and Ethan have been betrothed since childhood. If he dares not marry you, I'll make sure he regrets it. Your parents trusted us to take care of you before they passed away. Besides, your father saved our family. You don't have to worry about anything." When I didn't respond, they exchanged a glance before shaking their heads in exasperation. "You're so stubborn," Olivia finally said with a sigh. "Fine. We'll cancel the engagement banquet." I listened silently as Olivia made the call to cancel the banquet. She informed the event company to withdraw the reservation and refund the deposit. Just like that, the engagement banquet, still in its planning stages, was gone. Letting out a small sigh of relief, I stood up and bowed deeply to both of them.
I knew they meant well.
By all accounts, Ethan was the model student in everyone's eyes, the perfect son. Even his own parents couldn't understand why I was so insistent on canceling the engagement, but I couldn't explain. I couldn't tell them that in my past life, I was betrayed by those closest to me, stumbled during the college entrance exams, had my entire life turned upside down, and ultimately died in a car accident orchestrated by jealousy and malice. After the engagement was canceled, Olivia and Mr. Johnson told me I would always be their daughter, even without the formal arrangement. I didn't tell them that I planned to leave their family after the exams. For now, I stayed, determined to accompany them through the next 2 months. In the days leading up to the exams, Olivia insisted on driving me to school as she held my hand tightly. Her voice trembled with emotion, urging me to study hard and promising to visit me often. When I unpacked my things at school, I discovered she had slipped a thick wad of cash into my bag. Tears streamed down my face. Olivia must have noticed that my room was slowly being emptied, but she chose not to confront me. Instead, she let me carry out my plans. Respecting my decisions like a quiet guardian, I opened my suitcase to retrieve some clothes when I suddenly heard Ethan's voice at the door. "Is Emily still upset?" I turned to see Ethan standing there, his face visibly startled when he realized it was me. "Claire, what are you doing here?" he asked. Flustered, I gestured toward the room next door. "Your room is over there." That moment, the door to the neighboring room opened, and Emily peeked out. She offered me an awkward smile before retreating back inside. I looked at Ethan. Guilt was written all over his face after a moment of hesitation. He said Emily's home situation isn't great, and she lives far from the school. With the exams coming up, I thought it'd be easier for her to stay here since our place is close to campus. I hadn't expected things to progress to the point where they were sharing a roof and, apparently, a bed. Ethan seemed to sense my silence after a pause. He added,
"Right.
"Why don't you move your stuff into my room?"
You can stay there for now."
"I'll take the floor," as he spoke. He opened the door to his room and looked inside. "By the way, what happened to all the books in your room? You used to have so many." I picked up one of my textbooks and pursed my lips. Well, this villa was his. After all, it didn't matter to me where I stayed as long as I wasn't treated as a guest. I've already finished those books. They weren't useful anymore. "So I got rid of some of them," I said casually. Ethan frowned. "Even if the exams are only 2 days away, you might need those books later. Why would you sell them?" I didn't respond, seeing my silence. He added, "What about the engagement? What did my parents say?" He placed the book back on the desk. And I replied evenly, "They said the timing wasn't right. We'll talk about it later." This was the excuse I had agreed upon with Olivia and Mr. Johnson to delay the engagement. Once I moved all my belongings out and settled back into my new home, I planned to have a proper conversation with him about it. Ethan seemed satisfied with the explanation and didn't question it further. He nodded lightly and muttered, "All right, if that's the case." Then he stepped out, saying he'd handle moving some things and that I didn't need to worry about it. I looked at the room's nearly empty bookshelves. Only a few martial arts novels we had read together remained. For a moment, I considered returning them to Ethan. But my thoughts were interrupted by the sound of laughter outside. Ethan's voice was deep and calm, Emily's playful and coquettish, and Mrs. Smith's kind and cheerful. The three of them seemed so at ease, as if nothing had changed. I sat back down silently. Sharing a room with Ethan was already inappropriate, even if the engagement hadn't been canceled. But with the college entrance exams just 2 days away, leaving now would only cause unnecessary drama. Ethan would surely make a fuss. I decided to wait until bedtime to quietly set up a spot for myself on the living room couch. After studying all day, I wanted to sleep early. However, Emily, full of energy, was lounging in the living room in a camisole nightgown, pulling Ethan aside to help her with her questions. Ethan glanced at me briefly before coaxing her upstairs, yet their laughter and conversation carried through the walls, as if intentionally loud enough for me to hear, feeling suffocated. I stepped outside for some fresh air. "Claire, why are you out here in the middle of the night? Aren't the exams soon?" "You'll catch a cold," called the neighbor from her window, her concern genuine. The house was stifling. I replied with a small smile. The neighbor, whose husband worked in real estate, had a comfortable life. She often brought me little souvenirs from her trips abroad. Treating me kindly, she leaned over the balcony, her tone exasperated. "That Ethan, I swear. He seemed so devoted. But look at him now, bringing some other girl into the house right before your big exams. And you, why don't you put him in his place? You're too nice." The two of you are practically engaged. But you're letting this slide? If you let him get away with it now, he'll think he can walk all over you in the future. She continued her tirade. But I only half listened. Apparently, Ethan had told everyone that I had suggested bringing Emily home because of her poor family circumstances and long commute, claiming I wanted to help her focus on studying. I laughed to myself bitterly. Clearly, Ethan was just trying to save face, using me as a shield to fend off criticism. But since I was planning to leave soon, I didn't want to waste energy on meaningless arguments. I nodded politely and said nothing. The next morning I left for school early. The neighbor saw me off. Urging me again to talk some sense into Ethan, I just smiled and waved goodbye. When I arrived at the classroom, there weren't many students yet. I took out my notebook of mistakes and reviewed a few questions. But then I noticed something that didn't belong to me. A shiny, conspicuous watch placed in plain sight, pushing my books to the corner of the desk. Ethan, my watch is gone." Emily's panicked voice rang out as she frantically searched her bag, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. That watch was worth nearly $10,000. I held the watch in my hand, intending to return it. But the moment Emily saw it, a glint flashed in her eyes. She suddenly lunged toward me, slapping my hand hard. The watch flew out and landed on the floor with a clatter, drawing everyone's attention. The murmurs began immediately. Isn't Claire the one raised by Ethan's family? How could she steal someone else's things? Even if she dreams of marrying rich, a dog's nature can't change. Emily's voice, soft and tearful, chimed in. Ethan, there must be some misunderstanding. Claire must have her reasons. Her tone was so innocent, so considerate. Just as I remembered from my past life, she always appeared harmless, but her words twisted the truth and planted doubt in others' minds. Ethan frowned deeply. Claire, do you know that stealing is a crime? You could go to jail for this. Emily's friends quickly chimed in. Emily, why are you defending her? Someone like that probably has their eyes on more than just your watch. And to pull this right before the exams, she must be trying to mess with you on purpose. Another student added with disdain. She's just jealous that Emily and Ethan are close, but that doesn't excuse breaking the law. She could ruin her entire future. More voices joined in. You never really know people, do you? We should just call the police. I stood silently amidst the accusations, the chaos swirling around me, feeling the all-too-familiar sting of betrayal. I picked up the shattered glass-covered watch and said, Sure, call the police. After all, the only person who really knows how this watch ended up in my drawer is the one responsible. Barefoot doesn't fear wearing shoes, I thought. Sure enough, Emily's face turned pale as she clung tightly to Ethan's sleeve. No, don't call the police, she stammered. That wouldn't be good for Claire. She's about to take her exams, too. Her friends, however, weren't so kind. Emily, you're too soft-hearted, one of them said. People like her will just take advantage of your kindness. Soft-hearted. I let out a bitter laugh, then suddenly raised my hand and slapped Emily across the face. The sharp sound echoed in the room, leaving her stunned and speechless. Pathetic, aren't you, Emily? Do you really not know what you've done? Do you need me to air out all your dirty deeds for you to feel satisfied? Ethan, seeing her cheek rapidly swell, immediately pulled her into his arms. Claire, what's wrong with you? Have you lost your mind? Lost my mind. I laughed bitterly. That's Rich. She's the one accusing me of theft right before the most important exam of my life. You want the truth? Check the security cameras. They'll tell you everything. A few students who had remained neutral began to speak up. Yeah, let's just check the cameras. That'll clear everything up. Ethan's expression darkened, but he muttered. Claire, there's no need to deny it. I can pay for the watch. I took a step back and sneered. You think I did it, Ethan? You've known me for years. Do you really believe I'm that kind of person? He hesitated, his fingers twitching slightly as if reconsidering his assumptions. But then the notice came back. The security cameras had conveniently been out of order. I had no way to prove my innocence. And the watch ended up being handed over to the principal. The teacher, aware of the watch's high value, called me into the office. Ethan suddenly appeared, and declared, "Emily said she won't press charges." The Johnson family's wealth and influence were undeniable. Even the principal couldn't ignore Ethan's words. The teacher looked troubled but had no choice but to return the watch. Emily, of course, put on another performance, crying dramatically for over an hour while Ethan comforted her. He seemed entirely absorbed in her tears, paying no attention to anyone else. Later that evening, Ethan came to find me. "Claire," he began, his tone suggesting he wanted to argue. I sat down, waiting for him to speak. He hesitated, his face stiff and uncomfortable. "I'll sleep on the couch tonight," he finally said. I stayed silent. He paused again, clearly unable to hold back what he really wanted to say. "Emily is upset," he continued. "She cried all afternoon. Couldn't you have just let her be? It's only a couple of days until the exams. Do you really have to be so petty?" I let out a cold laugh, which seemed to catch him off guard. He probably expected me to get angry, maybe even start defending myself. Instead, my calmness seemed to annoy him more. "Fine," I said, smiling faintly. "Whatever you say." This unexpected response made him falter. For a moment, he seemed unsettled, as if something was slipping out of his control. In my past life, I had trailed after Ethan like a shadow, laughing only when he laughed, afraid to cry if he was displeased. Looking back, I felt like a fool. In this life, I knew better. I would keep my distance. Ethan clearly hadn't expected my easy agreement. His expression flickered with a hint of panic, as if he could sense that something was slipping away but couldn't grasp it. The next day, I returned to my old apartment a day earlier than planned. I took all my personal documents with me, just in case, that night. I sat at my desk, reviewing my mistake book. Halfway through, I heard a knock at the door, thinking it was my neighbor. I opened it without much thought. Standing there was Ethan, wearing only a t-shirt, his face pale and his hair disheveled, as if he'd been exposed to the cold night wind. My first thought was that Ethan still wasn't willing to let me go. The neighborhood was quiet, with only the occasional cry of a stray cat echoing in the darkness. Ethan stared at me intently, his eyes drilling into mine as if he were searching for answers or trying to break through my resolve. "Come home with me," Ethan said, his voice unusually soft. I looked at him calmly and replied, "This is my home." He reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I took a step back to avoid him. "Claire, don't be mad. Please just come home with me," he said. Ethan lifted one foot, as if about to step inside and help me with something. But I quickly pushed the door half closed. His gaze landed on the items sitting on the edge of my living room table, and his expression immediately shifted. "What are those?" I froze for a moment. They were the things I had packed up and brought back from the Johnsons' house. Old books I planned to sell. Ethan's face grew tense, his expression a mix of confusion and anger. "You've kept them in such good condition. You've always been careful with your belongings," he muttered, as if talking to himself. I sighed, but my grip on the door handle remained firm. Ethan frowned. "You're still upset. Emily was in a hurry and misunderstood you, but she really loves that watch. She's always respected you, and she cares about you. She even urged me to come find you today. But you're always so." He trailed off when he noticed the way I was looking at him, distant, as if he were a stranger. His mouth moved as if to say more, but the words never came out. I laughed dryly. "Respect? Respect is not getting cozy with someone else when you know your engagement is coming up. Respect is not letting her sleep in your bed while you're still with someone else." Ethan's face cracked, his expression wavering between disbelief and defensiveness. "What cozy? I just feel sorry for her. Her family situation isn't good, so I'm just helping her out a bit more." "Helping her?" I scoffed. "Does helping include sharing a bed? When did giving every girl you feel sorry for a home become your life's mission?" His face turned pale, his composure visibly shaken. "Claire, you're angry right now. Let's calm down. Tomorrow, the driver will come to pick you up," he said hastily before turning and stumbling out of the apartment. I watched him leave, listening to his hurried, uneven footsteps fading down the stairs, smiling faintly. I closed the door. It's funny how extreme anger can make you laugh. How could I have been so blind in my past life? Chasing after someone so alien to me? Determined to avoid a repeat of my past, I focused all my energy on studying, staying at home, and keeping to myself. Ethan didn't try to find me again. One evening, as I was reviewing mistake explanations, I heard a faint rustling outside my door. Curious, I turned the handle to check, but the clinking sound of a chain suddenly echoed. I realized I'd been locked in with an iron chain. I couldn't believe Emily had the audacity to pull such a stunt, even in a different setting. Without hesitation, I picked up my phone. The next morning, our class gathered outside, preparing to enter the exam hall. Emily was smiling brightly, her mood unusually cheerful. "Don't worry, Claire won't be late," she said with a smug confidence. Ethan, standing beside her, gently patted her head. "Good luck on your exams, Emily." Looking into her doe-like eyes, his expression softened. But then, he seemed to recall the cold, detached look I had given him the other day. A trace of unease flickered across his face, an emotion he couldn't quite shake off. As the teacher ushered the students into the exam hall, my absence became apparent. Emily's smile widened, her heart bubbling with joy, like an open can of soda. She could already imagine I wouldn't show up. Joy bubbled up within Emily as she beamed with satisfaction. After the final exam, reporters caught up with Jason He, the perennial runner-up in the grade rankings. For an interview, the host asked, "You're the first student we've interviewed. Was this exam difficult for you?" Jason smiled confidently at the camera. "It was manageable." Emily, who was walking behind him, chimed in with a sweet smile. "Jason, this time you'll finally be first in the grade rankings." Jason's expression darkened, his usual politeness cracking. "Don't set me up for failure, Emily," he said sharply, his tone making her flinch. Emily scrambled to explain. "But Claire didn't even show up for the exams. If you're not first, then who else could be?" Jason didn't bother responding to her. From the day the exams began, I hadn't stepped foot back into the Johnsons' home. The next time I saw Ethan was just before the celebration banquet. Emily, clinging to Ethan's arm with a radiant smile, walked in with him. The moment Ethan saw me, he instinctively shook her hand off, though his mood seemed off. He quickly recovered and smiled at me. "Claire, it's okay if the exams didn't go well. You can always repeat the year. My cousin runs a fantastic preparatory class. The resources are excellent. I can recommend you join with your previous performance. You'd surely get into university, be next year. And even be our junior." I pressed my lips together lightly and said, "Such a great opportunity. Why not save it for yourself?" Emily's friends immediately jumped in, bristling with indignation. "Claire, don't be so ungrateful. Emily's just thinking about what's best for you. Plenty of people take an extra year to study and improve. Don't throw away your future just because of your pride." Their fake sincerity was so blatant it was laughable. Jason happened to walk in at that moment and overheard their remarks. With a disdainful glance, he said, "Emily, you and your pack of dogs are barking nonsense again. On the day of the exams, you were cursing someone to fail. Now you're shamelessly suggesting a top student retake the year. Your audacity is incredible. Want me to give you an award for it?" Emily's face turned pale. She glanced at Ethan, clearly hoping for support. Ethan frowned, seemingly displeased with Jason's mocking tone, and took a step closer to me. "Even if you didn't take the exam, just come home," Ethan said. "Even if you don't go to college, my family can still take care of you." And that's when I understood, no matter how outrageous Emily was, Ethan would always justify it to him. Her actions were excused by her difficult upbringing, and others were expected to accommodate her. Something inside me snapped without warning. I slapped Ethan across the face. The sharp sound silenced everyone. Emily froze my cry, the tears in her eyes vanishing in shock as she stepped protectively in front of Ethan. "Why did you hit him? Are you crazy?" she shouted, raising her hand to slap me in return. Before her hand could land, Jason grabbed her wrist and shoved her heart, causing her to stumble into Ethan's arms. "I've seen enough. A little discipline won't hurt," Jason said coldly, his smile more like a sneer as he looked at the two of them like they were a ridiculous spectacle. Ethan's expression darkened as he walked over to me, grabbing my wrist tightly. "You're coming with me today. We need to settle this once and for all." Pain shot through my arm, and I stumbled forward, nearly crashing into him. I instinctively prepared to kick him, but Jason was quicker. His fists connected with Ethan's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Jason stepped protectively in front of me, shielding me with his arm. "Are you blind? She doesn't want to go with you. Then back off. Go to the hospital and get your eyes checked," Jason said, his voice calm but laced with warning. Ethan clutched his reddened jaw, his face a mix of anger and frustration. His glare bore into me, as if trying to suppress the storm brewing inside him. Emily quickly jumped in to defuse the tension. "Ethan, don't fight over someone like her."
"It's not worth it," she said.
Desperately tugging at his arm, few classmates, having arrived early, began to notice the commotion and turned to watch. Ethan's expression shifted multiple times, his chest rising and falling with restrained emotions. Finally, he turned to me and said in a low, deliberate voice, "Claire, I'm so disappointed in you," I said to Ethan. After everyone left, I stood there for a moment, calming my emotions. Jason looked at me, a trace of concern on his face. I shook my head. "It's just that I didn't get the chance to kick him earlier."
"You beat me to it. Such a shame."
Jason fell silent for a moment, then burst into hearty laughter.
"You. Haha."
I really didn't expect that. I didn't attend the celebration banquet in the end. Jason, noticing my reluctance to deal with Ethan and Emily, suggested we go to the riverside to watch the fireworks instead. Parents celebrating the end of exams had bought fireworks, and we spent 3 hours watching the colorful bursts light up the cold night sky. As the final pieces fell, glittering and fading, the night grew quiet. Jason turned to me, his profile sharp in the dim light, and leaned down to whisper near my ear. "Why not consider someone else for a change?" I stayed silent, pretending not to hear. Right now, my plans for the future didn't include love. My heart was void of men. I believed I needed solitude to grow stronger. The day the results were released, gossip spread like wildfire among the students. Emily had been taken away by the police right after checking her scores. Pictures of her being escorted into a police car flooded every group chat. At the same time, news of my being ranked first in the grades spread just as quickly. Some classmates from my exam hall came forward. "I told you, I saw someone sitting in her seat. You all insisted she didn't take the test." "Yeah, I saw her too." Another chimed in. "She took the test, and even got into university." I feel so proud to say I'm in the same class as Claire. It's a dream come true. The tide of public opinion shifted rapidly. Videos of Emily boasting to the host about Jason becoming the top-ranked student resurfaced, and were now ridiculed online. The backlash was swift and merciless. After being bailed out by Ethan's family money, Emily discovered the tables had turned completely in my favor. Pale with rage, she fainted upon seeing a screenshot of my top-ranking scores and had to be hospitalized. On the eve of the exams, Emily had locked me in my old apartment building under the guise of trying to convince me she had manipulated Ethan into giving her my address, all to disrupt my focus.
I hadn't made a scene about it then.
Instead, I quietly filmed her from the window, ensuring I had proof. I waited for this moment when she would soar to imagined heights, only to plummet back down to reality. In this second chance at life, I couldn't let her actions go unpunished. Once in college, I juggled part-time work with my studies, consistently ranking at the top of my class. I occasionally heard rumors about Emily and Ethan breaking up. Apparently, during a conversation with her friends, Emily had accidentally let slip details about the watch and locking me in the room. Ethan overheard everything. He had been shocked. His perception of Emily completely shattered. He confronted her, demanding to know why she had pretended to be innocent all these years while blaming everything on me. For years, he had believed I was petty and mean-spirited, a bully. The stark contrast between what he had thought and the truth made him question his own judgment. By the time Ethan realized he had been wrong about everything, it was winter. Emily cried and begged him for 2 months. But all she got in return was a large breakup settlement and a curt, "Don't let me see you again." That was Ethan, always so self-centered, placing himself above everyone else. Meanwhile, Jason, who had also gotten into University A, kept subtly making his presence known. He'd sit beside me in class, join me for meals, or wait outside my classroom after exams. Today, there were fireworks near the river 5 kilometers from campus. Jason had invited me, and I agreed. It was time to address the dynamic between us and give our relationship some clarity. As the year ended, I wore my winter coat and buried my face in a thick beige scarf at the campus gate. I unexpectedly saw Ethan. His face was pale from the cold, and he looked haggard, as if he'd been waiting for a long time. The moment he recognized me, he rushed over and pulled me into a tight embrace. I struggled, pounding on his chest. But he didn't let go. He held the back of my head, his voice urgent as he said, "Claire, I know you're angry at me," Ethan said, his voice heavy with regret. "But I'm actually glad, because it means you still care." I didn't answer. Instead, I lifted my knee and drove it straight into his stomach, pushing him away. "Go home, Ethan. Stop acting crazy." Just as I finished speaking, Jason arrived, catching sight of the scene. Without hesitation, he shoved Ethan aside and instinctively stood protectively in front of me. "Haven't you had enough of haunting her like a ghost?" Jason snapped. Ethan's expression darkened as his anger flared. Seeing Jason reminded him of the scene before the celebration banquet, and the memory only fueled his rage. "Jason," Ethan growled, "are you coveting what's mine?" He raised his fist as if to strike. I stepped forward and cut him off before he could go any further. "Ethan, we have nothing to do with each other anymore." Hearing me call his name, Ethan froze, his aggressive posture faltering. "Claire," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I was wrong. If I had known you were going to call off the engagement, I never would have let you leave. I would have stayed by your side. I misunderstood you."
I realize that now.
"Let's start over."
Please.
I let out a cold laugh. "No, Ethan, Jason, let's go." Without hesitation, I reached for Jason's hand, and he responded by gripping mine tightly. Ethan stood there, stunned as we walked away, his figure growing smaller in the distance, left alone in the biting wind. He watched us, his face filled with disbelief by the bridge. The cold wind swirled around us as vibrant colors from the fireworks danced across Jason's sharp profile. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Claire, does this mean what I think it means?" I couldn't help but laugh softly. I had been waiting for him to ask that. Opening my mouth to respond, I was interrupted as Jason gently placed his warm hand over my lips. "Sure, let me speak first," he said, his voice low and tender. His star-like eyes locked onto mine as he began. "Claire, for 3 years, you've always been ahead of me. Whether in rankings in the dining hall or even in my thoughts. I've watched you eat, study, and tackle exams with that serious focus of yours. First, I thought it was admiration, but then I realized I'm a hopeless romantic, and I'm hopelessly in love with you." He looked up at the sky, his nose slightly red from the cold. As he continued, "I used to stand back, watching you cry, smile, and hurt, all for Ethan. It made me feel like a terrible person, lurking on the sidelines, hoping for a chance that seemed impossible. Then Emily showed up, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again." He smiled wryly. "I could tell you this story 100 times if you'd let me. I know you're scared of love, scared it'll distract you from your goals. You always say your heart has no place for men because you need your strength to wield your sword." Jason took a deep breath. His hand clenched at his side.
Well,
"How about this? I'll wield the sword for you. Will you let me?" I stared at him, caught off guard. Could it really be this simple? Slowly, I took off my warm gloves, placing my hand in his. "Then the job is yours," I said, smiling. "Boyfriend." His previously composed face lit up with vivid emotion. "Claire, Claire, Claire," he repeated, his voice full of joy. "My girlfriend."